People who make their living out of cleaning murder scenes, accidents and the like. What is the worst thing you have experienced in your career? Dad had to sew and wrap a guy's intestines back into his body once. Dude had surgery and pushed too hard on the toilet. Dude was fine, according to dad, just holding himself together on the toilet while a group of firefighters tried to figure out why TF they were sent instead of paramedics. Update: when he pushed too hard he opened a scar on his torso ab area and it all fell out onto his lap. Should have mentioned this when I wrote the post. One that stuck with me was a suicide in a bathtub. We couldn't drain the tub, so had to use a coagulant then scoop up the bloody mess into biohazard bags. Same for the toilet. Another was a suicide by gun in a basement full of boxes, which was a nightmare to clean as even the smallest bit of flesh had to be found and cleaned up. The smell of the smallest piece of flesh meant the job wasn't done until it was found. One scene. The cops thought it would be helpful to put newspaper on top of the leftover melted body oils, which dried to the floors and was terrible to clean up. Sad cleaning up these things when family is in the other room as well. Not working the job anymore, but definitely gave me an appreciation for the hard work biohazard cleanup crews do. Mostly on call as well, so you never know how long you will be away from home. Edit: another one that wasn't as gross but felt straight out of a horror movie. Trailer where the person had squished what had to be thousands of pantry moths onto every wall. Living in pure filth. Had to have had a mental condition. Just really sad. I posted this on another thread, so just copy and pasted it, but this was one that I had to do clean up after a murder. It was a rehab house for ex-cons. 4-bedroom house with communal bathroom and kitchen. Sunday morning and Guy A is in his room listening to music pretty loud. Guy B is in the kitchen cooking his breakfast. B knocks on A's door and tells him to turn it down. There's a small argument and B returns to his breakfast and A turns his music up. So B grabs the biggest knife in the kitchen, kicks in A's door and stabs him through his left shoulder, entering by his collarbone. A runs out of his room, across the landing, down the stairs, out the front door, back inside, back up the stairs and collapses on the landing. When I got there it was like a scene from a movie. Walls and ceilings everywhere A had been were caked with blood. Apparently after B stabbed him, he returned to cooking his breakfast. There was a half-eaten breakfast in the kitchen when I got there. Medic here. First responder to a motorcycle collision. Guy who crashed was a friend. He'd been torn in half and almost decapitated. Had to walk away from the scene and let my driver and another crew handle it. Think about it daily. Not a cleaner, but my brother's best friend is a police officer and I heard all about this horrible experience. My brother's friend took him on ride-alongs. All the time. One day, they were responding to a welfare check. This guy's neighbor saw his apartment door cracked open for several days and called the police. They went to check it out and found a college student, 18-19, who had shot himself. The most disturbing part to my brother was that the kid had all of his belongings boxed up and labeled. He had letters written out and labeled for who they were supposed to go to. And he even went as far as laying out a tarp and then putting heavy blankets over himself before he shot himself as a courtesy to the people that would have to clean his remains. This wasn't a spur of the moment decision. This was a very well thought out suicide and the guy was obviously thinking about everyone who would have to deal with it too. So sad to imagine such a thoughtful person in so much pain that he meticulously orchestrated his suicide. My brother said the scene messed him up. Not because of the gore, but the lack thereof. Because this guy so meticulously and thoughtfully offed himself. I work in the ER. I was told by someone that works for a funeral home that they had to go get a girl that had overdosed and passed away. They said she had her breasts augmented and was pregnant. Turns out she overdosed while taking a bath and had decomposed enough that her breast implants and the fetus were floating around in the water. Then I clocked out and had lunch. When I was a bartender, a couple of clients told me the worst part about the job is cleaning melted bodies. I don't know the science behind that, but from what I understand is if a body stays for a while in a certain condition of temperature and humidity, it melts. And those guys have to remove that person's remains in buckets. I had a great uncle who helped clean up the bodies left behind by Hurricane Audrey in 1957, and he said that the smell persisted in his nose for weeks after. It got so bad that he went to the doctor to see if they could do anything, and they clipped all of his nose hairs and the smell went away. It was explained to him that the smell had soaked into the hair, but I don't claim to know the validity of that statement. The hurricane hit South Louisiana in June of that year, and most of the bodies recovered were found in the saltwater marshes that cover the area. So it's safe to assume that they were in an advanced state of decay. I've heard it said that the smell of the decomposing bodies was so bad that the alligators would actively avoid the areas, but I don't know the validity of that either. One of my first jobs after moving, I did this. And the job that had me walking wasn't even as scene as described. We did all types of hazmat cleans, and the worst was actually a couple went on vacation and came back to backed up septic. Think about 1 foot thick, hard, dried out, crusty septic waste spread throughout the entire first floor of a house. Not going further into detail here. Was nasty. Septic. Not skeptic. On break and mobile. So yeah. Working for a tow truck driver that get the calls after crashes. The worst one for me was a family of 6 coming back with over 10 pizzas for a baseball team. It was a head-on with a tractor trailer, 18-wheeler. The ambulance took the bodies away, of course. Everyone died but one little guy. There was so much blood and vomit. Diapers. Toy dolls covered in blood. The pizza was everywhere inside of the car, like 2 inches thick on everything and all over the road. There was so many backpacks and things just covered in pizza blood. It is hard to even describe it to this day. It was oozing out all over the road and was like an exploded pizza pocket. Everyone that was waiting in the traffic jam looked horrified. Friend of mine does this. His worst was an elderly woman who died in a bath. Skin falls off like long cooked meat. So he just saw piles of skin flesh. Goddamn, just writing this makes me gag. I spent some time with the coroner to shadow for school. They were showing me different cases and going over them. Pictures included. The one that seemed to emotionally bother this particular guy the most was a scene where a father was coming home and pulling into the driveway. His daughter, 3 years old, was running to greet him, and he didn't see her and ended up running over her head. The pictures were heartbreaking enough. I can't imagine what the dad went through when he saw her like that. There was another one that had 3 bodies. Some guy killed his wife, his affair partner, and her daughter. Put them in a shed in the middle of summer and left town. They were found 3 weeks later. Basically piles of putrid slime. Maggots, like fill 10-gallon buckets full. And bloated body parts sloughing off as they tried to bag them. The murderer had a pilot's license and has never been caught. The decomp room smelled for months after that. Not me personally, but my dad used to be an EMT firefighter. In the late 80s. He got a call about a horrid smell coming from the neighbor's house of the person calling it knowing what it was EMT. Firefighter. And police were dispatched. They found the house was owned by a single old lady who died in her living room chair. Not too bad, right? Wrong. The chair was an old leather recliner, and as she was decomposing she melted and fused with the leather chair. When the EMTs got there, they had to remove her from the house, and when they tried to pull her off, her back skin, arms and lower body separated from the rest of her body and remained attached to the chair. Decomposing flesh, blood and organs fell out and all over the charren floor. People were vomiting every 10 seconds and couldn't stand to be inside longer than a few minutes. My dad describes the smell and scene as the worst thing he has ever seen. Her body was so decomposed she was basically liquid inside with a fragile shell. He had to leave and grab a full respirator from the fire truck, and even then it didn't do jack poop. The others took turns going in to retrieve the pieces so they can be disposed of. When they were finished, they burned the chair in the front yard. A family friend was a first responder to a scene where a young woman committed suicide by running onto a busy highway at night. A semi-truck hit her and essentially her body exploded. He described the scene of just picking up pieces scattered across the road and the shoulder. Edit. This got more attention than expected. The poor driver of the truck thought he'd hit a deer. And didn't know it was a person until he saw the tattered clothing on the road. This happened probably 12 years ago. The story stuck with me because of how cavalier he spoke about it. Sadly, this wasn't the worst call he'd ever had. And there were a few he refused to speak about. Not me. But my mother was a firefighter EMT for a long time. She always told me some crazy stories. There are two that have always stuck with me. The first, two men whose families didn't accept their relationship and it weighed on them so badly that they decided to take their own lives. They attempted this by getting in a tub, taking some drugs, and then using a power saw to saw off each other's arms and bleed out the direction they cut. However, didn't make them bleed out as they had wished. And then they were left with one arm uncut and no arm to cut it. My mother told me it was such a bizarre scene to walk in on that she still doesn't believe it was real. The second, they responded to a death a few days after a man had died in his hot tub. Multiple days in the extremely hot water. When my mother and her partner went to pull him out, he had basically boiled alive and all the meat on his body just slid off the bone. Edit. Thanks for the awards. Bonus story for Yap. My mother once ran a call where a man had died in his house and wasn't found until a few days later. When she and her crew arrived, they had found that the man's cats, having been without food for days, ended up eating the man. With us having cats, the sight of a man whose face had been devoured by blood-soaked cats just absolutely freaked her out. Not in cleanup, but I have a friend who is a paramedic. And he said the only call that ever really got to him was a call for a large overweight woman who had a fecal impaction who was they found laying on the floor naked and puking up poop. I worked for a restoration company rarely cleaned up after dead bodies. And I got the only one during my tenure at the company. The lady had passed probably 2 weeks before anyone did a wellness check. So the entire room was contaminated. By the time I got there to do the cleaning, there were so many dead flies and maggots on the floor it was truly shocking. We rolled the carpet and carpet pad up that was in the room. And all of the dead bugs sounded like a rain stick you get in a cheap tourist shop. That sound sticks with me after 3 years. Teen girl had to be pieced back together. Steering column went through her chest like a straw through a slice of cheese. Had to put the hamburger heart back together. I'm so terrified of bothering anyone that as I read all of these I kept thinking stupid things like I hope when I die I turn the AC up really high so I don't turn too much into goo for other people to clean up. I'm a first responder. A few days ago I had a bad one. Not the worst or the grossest, but it was rough. I had a wellness check in a at-risk community apartment building. There was a younger lady, terminally ill, living on her own. Her son was calling for our help in getting in contact with her. I spoke with security and they had a key to her place. I made entry into a dark apartment. I was navigating by flashlight. I wasn't expecting to find anyone because her neighbors told me she was in the hospital. The bathroom was covered in bodily fluids that had solidified. I found more dried human waste on the floor leading to the bedroom. I found the female on the floor in the kitchen sitting up in the dark with my flashlight. Honestly, it was something out of a horror film. I felt so horrible for her. Dying alone in her pajamas. So ill. Her head was slumped down with fluids that had dripped out of her and solidified. Almost frozen like icicles. She had been dead for a few days. That image of seeing her has just stuck with me. The loneliness of the deceased situation is what makes this so horrible to me. No one deserves to die like that. Thanks for letting me vent. Edit. I didn't expect this to blow up. I'm incredibly grateful for the messages and the replies. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. My ex-partner's cousin used to do this. According to what I heard, someone committed suicide from the 24th floor and she had to chip frozen brain matter off the railings leading into the building. Also how she met her husband. They both were working the same job. Not exactly what you asked, but my husband's uncle worked as a paramedic firefighter for many years. The accident that disturbed him the most, warning, involves children, was getting a call about 3 boys locked in the trunk of a car. From what I can remember, the kids were playing around outside during the summer and got into an old non-running car out on someone's property. He had to pry the trunk open, and unfortunately all 3 had passed. He said that day took a lot out of him and he still can't get the images out of his head.
Hi there. Look, if you enjoyed the video, well, why not go ahead and hit that like and subscribe to Reddit Stories. In fact, if you want to see even more responses to this thread, well then, take a look. There's the link in the description below. And remember, show some love to those authors while you're there. And I look forward to seeing you next time.